This is a pressure relief slash check valve. McMaster Carr sells them, Granger sells them. They're not something you would typically find at like Lowe's or Home Depot though. It has a body with a lock nut, and then you have a taper at either end of the housing. If you put it together so that the spring is at this end and the ball is at that end, then if you have a vacuum here, you have a vacuum relief valve. After you build up so much vacuum, the ball will be sucked back against the pressure of the spring, and it will allow air to come in. If you reverse it, then it's a pressure relief valve. If you have pressure on this side, then after you build up so much pressure, the pressure will overcome the spring, dislodge the ball from the seat, and bypass. Okay, there's two different tricks that this thing is usable on. First one is our vapors from the fuel tank. Now we have a device on the fuel line to heat the fuel. And most of the cars that we're going to see in the shop will have a high pressure line that we're going to heat. That warmed fuel will go across the fuel rail, past the regulator, and back to the fuel tank again. So we're going to be over time as we drive mile after mile after mile, the overall temperature of the fuel in the tank will get warmer and warmer and warmer. That warmer fuel is going to more readily vaporize also. So if you've ever, like in the middle of summer, gone to fill the fuel tank and you pull the cap off, gosh, we're going to exasperate that even worse by heating the fuel. And all that fuel, man, it's perfect, guys. It's in a pure dry vapor. That is the most combustible form of fuel we can possibly hope for. And we're making it back in the fuel tank. Unfortunately, the fuel pump's pumping the liquid up. But we got a charcoal canister circuit, evaporative emissions. So we'll have three lines coming from the tank: high pressure line, the return line, and our vapor line. So if we were to just tap that vapor line and run those vapors to the air cleaner right in front of the throttle body, then as we're driving along, we can take that highly combustible, ready to do action vaporized fuel from the tank and bleed it off into the engine. After we've done that, then we can go back with our optimizer and tune for it. Sound good?
What about a DAP code? Yeah, DAP code.
Tank, air cleaner. You're going to have to maintain about 6 psi. Let me write that down. You're going to have to maintain about 6 psi on the tank. So you can actually set this on the bench. If you have an air compressor with a regulator or something, you can actually set this. Anything over 6 psi gets vented to the air cleaner. Try it down at 4 psi. Try 3 psi. Whoop, just set a code, back it off to 4. Reset the code. Is that a complete system? What happens when the engine's not running?
Ball reseat. The ball reseat under spring tension. Does the ball reseat under spring tension then?
When the pressure drops below whatever we have it set for, it'll reseat. But what happens if we go, and I don't know where you guys drove from, but let's say you had a system like this on your vehicle, and you had a fuel heater on the vehicle, and you drove here from, I don't know, Missouri or someplace. That fuel's going to be darn hot, isn't it? And is it going to quit vaporizing just because you turned the engine off? No. So you're going to continue to pump vapors up to the air cleaner, aren't you? Hope you don't have any bad ignition wires. This is a lock nut. This seat is actually part of this part. This seat is actually part of the overall housing. So you turn this in, it'll tighten the spring pressure, increase this pressure. Once you get it where you want it, you spin this lock nut up tight against the housing so it doesn't shift on you. Or, you loosen it up and that'll lower the pressure it takes to overcome the spring. We need to shut that fuel flow off when the engine's off. So here's the solenoid. Same thing that they have on the bottom of that new fuel cell arrangement over there. It's 12 volts. It's normally open. You apply voltage, it closes. I think this is normally open. You can get them normally closed. They only open when you apply voltage. And so you run this to the fuel pump relay so that you're only bleeding off tank vapors when the engine is running. Turn the key on, fuel pump will open this for and then shut it back off again. Fire up the engine, fuel pump relay kicks on, this opens constant. Now, you do drive from Missouri here, you show up with mostly an empty tank, you got high pressure vapor in there, you shut the key off, this shuts down. Now you're going to force those vapors through the normal charcoal canister. Safe as can be, no safety hazard. This one isn't too bad to do. There's an alternative that we've done in other classes. I think it's pictured in the book here. Nope. This was crankcase ventilation. Okay, this is crankcase ventilation. Crankcase ventilation, you can use the exact same arrangement, except here's your crankcase, and here's your manifold vacuum. So if we apply a vacuum on the crankcase, are there any benefits anybody can think of? Surely there are some, because Moroso sells a $275 pump kit for race cars. And it applies as much as 12 inches of vacuum on the crankcase. And race car builders eat them up.
Reduces back pressure.
Where?
Underneath from the crankside.
So what you're saying is we can improve power if we can build more pressure on the top, or we can improve power if we take away pressure from the bottom. Either way, we're increasing the pressure differential and increasing power output. Yeah. The rings seal better. The engine is cleaner inside because the moisture that builds up inside the engine. You get blow-by gases. Well, remember, HC plus O2 yields carbon dioxide, water, vapor, and heat. So there's water in the blow-by gases. This crankcase ventilation system will help pull that water out of the engine. It doesn't sludge up. Exhaust emissions go down too, for that matter. Here's another one that we had been using where this is just a 1/4-inch needle valve. Expensive as can be. You can pick up a little brass version at like Lowe's, Home Depot for about $8. This one's like a $40 valve because it has a little lock mechanism. But doing something like this, what you do is you'd have your engine then your PCV valve feeds over this way, and then you have like your little filter element that goes like this. Your PCV valve is going to give you a vacuum. So it's pulling a vacuum on the crankcase here. The only thing is quicker than it can pull a vacuum, you've got fresh air flowing in this way, right? So if we were to drop our ink, if we were to block this off right there, then the PCV valve would put a vacuum on the crankcase. Now, we might be putting 18 inches of vacuum on the crankcase, and that's not good. We want to regulate it. We want to tone it down. Something like 6 or 8 inches for the typical vehicles, about the high side. If you got pretty wore out gaskets and seals, maybe even drop it down to 4 inches of vacuum. So just blocking off the inlet side, not a good idea. Furthermore, what happens when you go to wide open throttle? You don't have any vacuum coming through the PCV valve because there's no vacuum to pull through. But yet you have the highest level of blow-by at that point. Now you're going to build up pressure in here. Block this thing off, you're going to blow the seals and gaskets out. So what we did was we made this little arrangement where we put a check valve on here. If we build up crankcase pressure with this little check valve, then the crankcase pressure could go through the check valve and back to the air cleaner. That's this thing. There's a little arrow on it. The arrow points to the air cleaner so that it'll vent the excess pressure back to the air cleaner. But yet under normal low crankcase pressure conditions, we can't get air being sucked back in. So the PCV valve is able to put a vacuum on the crankcase. Now, we had a little manual air bleed here where we would actually take and put a T on the crankcase side, put a vacuum gauge on there, and then we could adjust this for 4 inches or 6 inches of vacuum with this little knob here. Doing it this way, you would twist the housing to get your 4 or 6 inches of vacuum. And then after we were done adjusting, we'd remove the gauge from the system. That's got to be worth 2 or 3 miles per gallon, upwards of 6 miles per gallon or 8 miles per gallon. Something really efficient like that Escort, I bet you it gets 6 or 8 miles per gallon additional. Something like that Toyota that's pretty big, percentage-wise, it's going to be about the same. So you could replace this little manual valve with one of those spring-loaded check valves and be able to maintain vacuum anytime. If you set it for 6 inches of vacuum on the crankcase, as long as you have 6 inches coming through the PCV valve, you got 6 inches of vacuum on the crankcase. With this, you're going to regulate it percentage-wise. So if at idle you have 6 inches, at cruise you might only have 3.5 or 2. Any questions on this? Pass that around. Crankcase vacuum. All right. Boy, we're just wrapping up in perfect time. Now, we have addressed combustion efficiency. We have addressed the resistance with lighter weight oils, airing up the tires higher. We have not addressed a very powerful and influential character in this fuel economy maze, and that is the driver. My dad broke his leg. He was getting about 14 or 15 miles per gallon out of the family pickup. While his leg was broken, Mom started driving, and she got 18 miles per gallon out of that same pickup with no changes. I'm going to tell you about Diamond Larry, lives up in Indiana. Diamond Larry was able to get 54, 55 miles per gallon out of a stock Saturn because of his driving. He just bought a brand new 07 Toyota Prius. His best so far has been, for a tank, we're talking 1,000 freaking miles on one tank. He averaged over 85 miles per gallon. Driving. Guarantee none of you would want to ride with him. You'd be beating on him. Would you get your going? Jeez. Behind him, you'd be laying on the horn. Go, butthead, go. But nevertheless, he's taken this driving thing to the extreme, and he's getting 85 miles per gallon out of a stinking Prius. His best was 109, but that wasn't a full tank. That was just like a little mileage run. So we got 2 ways of getting the driver on our side. Everyone got this copied down? Good. We got 2 ways of getting the driver to help us achieve our goals. If it's a 96 or newer vehicle, you can get scan gauges very inexpensively. And when you go into the scan gauge, one of the functions in your setup is trip. If you push trip, you can view instantaneous and average fuel economy. Now, you don't have to have the big handheld that looks like, the ammo box. This is the diagnostic version. They have the little tiny ones, just maybe, that big or so, that they can sit there in their center stack, and they can watch their mileage. And it's a game. Yeah, let's see how good a mileage you can get. Drive for mileage. The other way is through a vacuum gauge. The higher the vacuum, the better the fuel economy, for all intents and purposes. And let's see here. 0, let's go 7, 12, 18, 22, 30. Anything lower than 7 inches of vacuum, this is all sea level stuff here, because understand that at the top of Vail Pass, you get about 10, 10.5 inches of vacuum at idle. So this is all sea level. But anything less than 7 inches we'll call max power. If you can convince your customer that if they can accelerate onto the freeway, get into traffic, take off from the stoplight, and keep that vacuum gauge above 7, they'll get better fuel economy. So then we'll call the 7 to 12 the just normal power range. Not power ranger, power range. 12 to 18, that would be their economy cruise. (18 to 22), that's your idle range. And then anything above 22 inches, that's, have I used all the colors? See if you can see yellow. Deceleration. Now we've got the human factor on our side. Couple moments of how to use a vacuum gauge, and you hook it up. And it's another product that you can sell. You buy it at one price, you sell it for your markup. Scan gauges, they got reseller programs. You can be making 35 bucks a piece on them. Now you got the human factor. Okay, does anybody have any other fuel economy tricks they want to share?
I remember in the 70s, someone sold a kit to give you better fuel economy, and it worked. Mm-hmm. Made people angry. It's a piece of wood you take behind your accelerator.
Mm-hmm. Limited your throttle angle. But it worked.
Money, made a lot of enemies too.
But it worked. Mm-hmm. Water injection, I'm going to spend just a moment on that. There's been quite a few kits. A very popular kit in the performance arena right now is called Devil's Own. Most of the performance water injection systems are not friendly to fuel economy. Here's the reason why. We want to build up pressure in the cylinder to push down on the piston. So we're going to convert our chemical energy to thermal energy. It's the thermal energy that creates the expansion that pushes down on the piston. Most water injection systems are spraying an atomized mist of liquid water into the cylinder. They're great for detonation control. Nitrous engines, turbocharged engines, they absorb a lot of that thermal energy. And in doing so, they keep the cylinder temperatures low enough that you don't go into detonation. But from a fuel economy standpoint, that thermal energy that liquid water is absorbing to vaporize could have been converted to push down on the piston. However, since we're going to convert chemical energy to thermal energy, the thermal energy is expanding the gases in the cylinder. Water vapor will push 12 times harder on the piston per BTU of energy input than will the nitrogen in the air. So for every given volume of nitrogen in the air you can replace with a water vapor, you get 12 times the push on the piston that volume contributed. So if you want to do a water injection for fuel economy, you do a steam injection. Or a real simple trick is to make a bubbler. Remember the small engine presentation, the glass jar bubbler? I'm not saying put a glass jar under the hood, but that's a bubbler. And you put water in there, and you run your PCV hose through that bubbler. The gases coming out of the crankcase have nasty stuff in it, so the water is going to condense that nasty stuff, and it's going to eventually build up in the water. So you got to change your water periodically, get all the crap out. But since the PCV gases are coming out fairly warm, you're going to bubble up. You're going to get mechanical action to help phase change some of the water. You're going to get thermal energy from the heated PCV gases to phase change some of that water. So essentially, you're going to pick up water vapor through the PCV system. And it works, you know, when the engine's cold. It works when the engine's warm. The drawback is that it will freeze. And then you have no PCV. And unlike this, where it thaws out rapidly, that doesn't. So it's like a spring to fall trick, and don't do it in the winter. But it does an awesome job of cleaning up exhaust emissions. Your part throttle power really goes up because that's where you're picking up the most water vapor. The higher the vacuum, you know, the more of that water you're able to just pull right on out. The water vapor just under a vacuum, the vapor point just drops. And so part throttle operation, a little twitch of the throttle gives you a lot more power. You're getting rid of those heavy oils. The heavy oils in the PCV gases cause detonation. You clean out your engine. You're kind of sort of steam cleaning the valves and the piston tops and all that. PCV plastic. Just get, you know, like 3-inch or 4-inch PCV plastic. Then you get the solid end cap. JB weld it in place. JB weld it in place. I didn't say use the glue because the oils in the PCV gases dissolve that glue. You would JB weld it in place, and then you get a receiver for a screw-in lid for the top. And then you can either take the PCV valve side gases in through the bottom and then come off the top and go to the base of the throttle body, or you can do like they do, you know, a tube that goes down from the top. That'll eliminate any potential leaks that a fitting screwed into the bottom might create.
I think they use like an air stone in there or something too, that sort of like bubbled out.
You don't want to do that with the PCV. If you're drawing in fresh ambient air that's got a filter on it, great. The oils in the PCV gases will clog that stone up. And then you get, and besides, the stones, they only have about this big of a hole. It's like an 1/8-inch hole. The other problem is these aerator stones used in fish tanks that you're talking about are put together with the glue. It's like a sand and a glue. And the glue is not petrochemical compatible. So the oils, if they don't clog the stone, will dissolve the stone. Yeah, I already tried that, but good thinking.
I think there was another thing called a condensator that they...
Condensator, fuel atomizer 2000, PCV jar. There's a lot of variations on the theme. Yeah, Wyoming Instruments has the fuel atomizer 2000, fuel atomizer 4000. I'm not pushing other people's products. I'm showing, you know, trying to tell you how to do stuff on your own. We mention them, but I'm pushing the HAFC kit primarily. So, any questions? All right, let's go back to work then.